And my mom, I don't think I mentioned this, but my mom had just gotten over bronchitis about 2 weeks prior. And so that was even still working its way out of her system. And what happened was throughout the night, I heard her, but it was almost like I couldn't remember it until I woke up. Her cough resurfaced right away. So she started coughing, and then she was tired. She was exhausted, and she was, not resting. And I'm like, I don't know if it's too late at this point, but I'm like, mask, we're doing all of these things, and I'm just like, I don't know, if there's a chance that we can prevent it from getting any worse. But by this time, the entire state of Georgia is a mess, right? And so we can't get tested. We can't, the hospitals are turning us away and saying we're not testing unless you're not able to breathe.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours. We tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home, and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner, and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
Telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them. Because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. That link is in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today I'll be talking to Keesha in Georgia. Keesha lost her mom, Rita Delores Coleman, to COVID on January 13th, 2022. This is the longest episode I've recorded so far, but it's so worth a listen. Keesha weaves such a beautiful tribute to her mom in this show. She talks about the family getting COVID, her truest feelings about that, because it was a family member who brought it into her home, And then Keesha talks about the way she grieved by trying to run from the pain until she realized she couldn't run anymore. For context, we recorded this episode on October 12th, 2022. Keesha mentions the movie John Q. We talk about Nora McInerney's podcast, Terrible Thanks for Asking. And Keesha also has a podcast called From Crying Out Loud. I've included all those links in the show notes below. And with that, I'd like to welcome Keesha to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for having me.
Yeah. Today we're talking about your mom, Rita.
Yes.
And she passed away on January 13th, 2022.
That is correct. The person I love, but the person I chose to like. I often say that.
I like that. I like that a lot. And you live in Georgia?
Yes, I'm based in metropolitan Atlanta, just outside of the city limits, right by the airport district.
Okay. All right. So, what I'd like to do, even though your mom passed away early in 2022, you come from a larger family and had a family group that stayed connected through pretty much those first 2 years of COVID. So if you could just go back to March 2020 and talk for a few minutes about how you first heard about COVID and how it changed your family group and how you navigated that pretty much safely for a couple years.
Sure. So interesting story. Right at the top of the pandemic, I think the day that we were declared in a state of national emergency, I was in flight. I was in the air on the way to Virginia. I have a sister who lives in Virginia, but I was actually on my way there for work. And what started to happen is in my former agency, travel, they started to just slowly but surely cancel travel. So that was kind of the first real, I think, face-to-face encounter that I had with, there's this thing that really is, infiltrating our world and starting to shift and change. I don't think any of us were able to forecast what was really about to happen. I think we were hearing things in bits and pieces. I think just on a global scale, I don't even think the approach from the start was very transparent and forthcoming. I can't speak to whether that was deceitful or whether it was just kind of like how we've been experiencing this, people trying to figure it out. What is it before we start talking about it and creating alarm? But nevertheless, there was enough alarm created for things to start changing. And so in the midst of travel changing at my organization, I'm still a consultant. I've changed organizations, but I was getting ready to travel for a consulting trip. And I just remember contacting the organization that I consult for. And I was like, hey, are we still traveling? We work with youth. And so I'm like, this is considered a mass gathering. We're usually, working with about 200 plus students. And I'm confused as to whether or not this is going to be something for us to do safely. And our coordinator was like, yeah, we're good. We're fine with travel. So I'm telling my employer, like, well, hey, I'm still traveling, so I'll let you guys know if anything changes. And so I'm in the air. I literally board the plane and I take my seat. And so me and some of my colleagues are just going back and forth. And I finally get this message that says they have canceled Summit. The students are not going to be able to come. And I was like, is it because of as soon as I'm responding to say, is it because of, this perceived threat of this virus? Right as I'm sending that text message, I get an alert from CNN that says we're, declare a national state of emergency. So it was very fast, very abrupt. In that moment, transparent moment, I just didn't, you can understand that something is going on, but I don't think any of us were able to predict or even understand the magnitude of what was about to happen. Yeah. And so I got to Virginia, we, our group of colleagues, we still ended up, doing some very cool work sections, but everything was happening around us. Like, we were the only ones in the hotel. They only had staff for us because most of the people, I think, who had any sense were already, gone. And it's like, okay, we have this group where we think we're safe. Like, exposure and all of that wasn't really, mask and all those things. Everybody was just stocking up on essentials. And so there was a hotel near a Walmart near our hotel. So our group, we were just kind of wandering the city. And so we walked to the Walmart, and it was literally like something you see in a movie. We were the only ones seemingly in the Walmart. Like, there probably were a few other shoppers, but we are just walking around with our hands in our pockets, and we're a really diverse group of people. So you got this black lady, this white guy, this Latina, like this Asian. We're representing like all of these, just a melting pot. And it really could have been an image of like the end of the world. Like, it was really wild. But just after that, I spent a few extra days in Virginia with my sister, but we get home, and then my employer, we had a meeting right before I came home online, and it was like, yeah, we're going to go virtual for just a few days, maybe a week, but we don't foresee this being a long-term thing. And I used to work in higher education, so if anyone's not familiar, they are not very friendly to the remote space, or to the remote, and work from home arrangement. And so it was not something that was forecasted to be a long-term thing. Or even, a month long. We just thought it was going to be a couple of weeks. And so I come home, and then of course we realize this is happening. We are shutting down. This is a state of emergency, and you're safe indoors. And I'm like, okay, what is this? What is happening? So just a little bit of, background for people who don't know. My mom, I often say she was my caretaker, but I was only her caretaker by virtue of her having limited mobility. So she used the wheelchair mobility aids to walk because she had osteoarthritis. And so it got really, really bad in her knees. But while she was able to stand and move, she mostly used aids to get by. And so it's just, I have two older sisters. But I'm the youngest, and it's just been me and my mom like all these years. I'm 41 years old. My mom passed just before my 41st birthday. But while we have this very close-knit family, my mom and I are just like the dynamic duo. Like, when I came home from college, her plans were to, just retire. She's an early childhood educator. So to retire and to go back to Griffin, Georgia with her, siblings and her family, and just kind of, settle. And I was like, no, like, you're staying with me. Like, I'm not married. I don't have kids. Like, let's hang out. And it's really been our life. Like, my parents divorced when I was 5. And it was, like I said, we're a very close-knit group, but it was my mom and I. My two older sisters, they have children. One of my oldest sister has grandkids. So everybody kind of had their thing. And then my mom and I, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, well, this is us. This is our little tribe when we're not with everyone else. So more succinctly to the point of the group that we were with over the course of the past 2 years, and how did we keep community and keep family at the front and center and do so safely. Of course, everybody transitioned to virtual. The kids were, virtual. We were working from home. My mom was still at a point she was able to safely get to like her doctor's appointments and her therapy. And so I'm thinking, like, we did all of this. Like, we did all of this safely. Like, for 2 years, this virus did not touch us. And my oldest sister and my niece, when I was working, they were responsible for getting her to her appointments. And she had a series of specialists. So it's just like, she was really, I think she could have been prone to it, but it was just so wild how even in safely doing all of those things that, and I guess we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that in all of that the virus would come into our house. Like, that is how it would happen. And so, we kept it safe. We didn't do anything other than hang with one another. Of course, like I said, she was at her external appointments, but for the most part, we were home. And we did a little bit of traveling, but we traveled like we were very much secluded once we got to the certain places, like, our own private villa, our own pool, just doing those types of things later in the pandemic to just kind of get away, to breathe, because I think, cabin fever was at an all-time high. And it was like, when it hadn't touched you, I don't think my family for sure, we never underestimated the seriousness of this, because we have older parents. Like, my mom was 75 when she passed. My dad is 82. And so they have pre-existing health conditions that we knew would put them at risk. And so it was very intentional, but it wasn't just to protect them. It was to protect other people as well. Like, my friends knew, like, oh, Keisha's not coming. We invite her, she's not going to go, because not only is she protecting her family, but she's just very conscious of when she shows up in the world, even if I were to have gotten it, I knew that it might have been bad, but it wouldn't be as bad as it would have been for my mom. And as ultimately we see what happened, but, just trying to be present for family and be present for one another, but also be safe. And so we had that. Like, we didn't congregate a whole lot, but we felt safe with the immediate people that we had. So that would be myself, my mom, my dad. He would come over sometimes, and then my older sister, and then my niece, and then even my great nieces and nephews. Like, they would stop by. So it was not, interestingly enough, it was not challenging. For me, I'm a little bit of a homebody. Like I said, I said in the beginning, I love my mom, but I also chose to like her. Like, we were friends, we hung out. So just being able to enjoy her still in that space, like, it really wasn't a huge deviation from our normal. Yeah. And so I recognize that that's a privilege, because for some people, being in was very hard, was very difficult.
Yeah. So how did it happen that COVID came into your family?
Yeah, so again, nobody had contracted the virus, at least not knowingly, but we're pretty sure that we were all COVID free for the full 2 years. And so Christmas, we've been together for each holiday since the onset of the pandemic. So it wasn't, again, a major deviation from our norm, because the assumption was that we all had the same understanding. We have these two senior parents that we have to take we have to pay close attention to, be very cautious with and around. Really quick, I even went to a really good friend's birthday party in New Orleans in October of 2021. And everybody's like, why don't you just fly out? I was like, no, I'm driving. And I'm only going to participate in the activities that I feel safe participating in, because I'm going back home to my mom. Like, most of my friends live alone or, with their spouses. And I'm like, you all have, circumstances that are not as risky as mine. I'm doing a lot just by showing up. And I'm just grateful that I have friends who love and care and understand. And I think now they understand on a different level, unfortunately. But, I was like, I'm driving. So I drove, I came back, and I didn't feel sick or anything, but I'm like, it's New Orleans, right? So I self quarantined. I was like, okay, well, told my sister, hey, you got to come look out for mom, because I traveled for a few days. I just need to make sure that nothing's in my system, and I'm going to go get tested. I'm like, I'm not feeling any way, but better safe than sorry. So fast forward, again, the same village, me, my mom, my dad, my sister. My oldest sister is in Virginia, but, they stayed at home. They decided to stay at home for the 2021 holidays. And my nephew, I had a nephew who was away at college. And unfortunately, his dad passed in November, unrelated to COVID, but he passed in November. And now that I'm hearing so many different stories around similar loss, a lot of people lost their elders and their loved ones when people came home from college. It is the wildest thing I've ever heard of. But to be, I'm in other, you know, I'm in a couple of grief counseling groups or grief groups, and just hearing people talk about, my niece came home from college, my niece came home from traveling, doing a cross country. And I'm just like, these young people brought this virus into the home. So my nephew, who was home from school, hung out with some friends. And I want to be fully transparent. I think one of the things that has been most healing for me in this journey and on this journey is to name it, the things that sit with me, the things that, cause me to cry in the middle of the day or have to excuse myself from a Zoom at work to say, hey, I'm having a grief moment. I'll be back. Like, let me recollect myself. But just being honest about it. And my nephew's young, he's 19, and his friends, they were hanging out and, doing what teenagers do, and what some teenagers do rather. And our understanding now is that, so they hung out 2 days in a row, he and this other friend. And I remember my mom and I, so this is the week of Christmas. So Wednesday, I think it was that Wednesday, my great niece, my mom and I had just come from a therapy session, and we stopped by my sister's house, and we, just checking on people, seeing how everyone's doing. And we just asked, like, where my nephew was. We was like, oh, where is he? And they're telling us he's at a friend's house. And we're like, really? In an Omicron surge? Like, he is hanging out? Like, he needs to stay at home. So we said that just in our natural sense of awareness, not really anticipating that this would be, the thing that changed our entire lives. And he hung out both days. Like, so he was with him that Wednesday and that Thursday. And as we talk more about it, or as we have spoken more openly about it, it appears that his friend was coughing. And these are young people who are trying to navigate this virus, some of them without guidance, right? So his friend said, oh, well, I'm coughing, but let me go get the booster. They're saying everybody's talking about the booster. So if I go get the booster, I'll be okay. And then my nephew goes back over to the house. So this is all information that we're finding out after the fact.
Yeah.
And at this point, if I can tell it how it was, if we're rewinding the time back, their entire house had COVID probably after that Thursday. So my sister had it, my niece had it, my younger nephew had it, and of course the nephew who brought it into the home. And they didn't know. So my oldest sister is diabetic. So when she's tired, that's kind of just what comes along with the territory. I have my niece who was also in the home. She has this little bit of a dry cough that she's had for years. So it was all of these kind of things that were associated with their day-to-day that didn't translate as anything new. And it was interesting, though, because my sister in Virginia, she had been on the phone with them Christmas Eve. So now we're at Christmas Eve, and I'm out running some errands, and my middle sister texts me, and she's like, hey, Wanda's really tired, and Faith has a dry cough. They may want to get checked because everybody knew they were coming over. And I was like, girl, that's their normal, and I'm even not thinking much of it. I'm like, that's their normal thing. I was like, yeah, but I'll see what they say. So I get home, and even my mom and I talk about it, right? And I'm like, yes, I had texted, and she said, tell him, she was suggesting that we get them tested. She was like, she just doesn't know that that's their normal routine. And I'm like, it was just something we brushed off. Now, you would rely on someone to tell you how they feel. Like, I'm like, we can't predict how you're feeling. We can't predict that you all are more tired than usual, or, you're feeling things that you don't normally feel. And so we knew nothing about this. And then we're at home. We had like chili and cornbread and gifts, like, just doing a movie night in, because all of us planned to just be at home Christmas Day. And we were like, we're just going to relax at home Christmas Day, but we'll hang out Christmas Eve. And we did like a wacky pajama party, gave all the gifts. It was a lovely time. My mom had a great time. She loved her gifts. I mean, it was just a normal, beautiful time. But when they walked into the house, my nephew, the one who, unfortunately brought this virus to our family, he was in a blanket and he kind of looked like he was perspiring. I'm like, what is going on? So we're looking at him and we immediately send him to like this isolated part of the house because we're like, what is this? Like, are you sick? Do you feel okay? So he's like, no, I'm fine. No, I'm fine. And we're looking at my sister. So it took a minute. And I don't know if people understand, like Omicron did not move slowly. It was one of those things where you only needed to be in contact for a few seconds and it was there. It's airborne. So it was in the atmosphere. And so we're not processing that this family is coming to our house sick. Remind you, we see these people often. So it's like, if you're not feeling well, it's okay that you don't come, And I think you and I, when we talked a little bit before, it's like, I think COVID really shattered the common sense of people because I'm like, it doesn't have to be COVID for you to not come around. If you're not feeling well, you shouldn't be around other people, especially people who are at risk.
Yeah.
And, it happened, pardon me if I get a little emotional, it happened immediately. We had a wonderful time together, but for me, everybody knows I'm a little bit, I'm not a little bit, I'm OCD. I'm a neat freak. And so while people are opening gifts and throwing paper and boxes everywhere, like I'm like cleaning up, making sure everything in the kitchen is okay. Like I think we had like chili cornbread, we had, drinks and beverages and just, I think we had pizzas for the kids. It's just a really comfortable night in of movies, games, comfortable pajamas and all of that. So I'm cleaning things up and at some point, and Jennifer, I promise you, I don't remember this. I don't remember the in-between, but at some point I'm sweeping the kitchen floor and I leave the kitchen and I just fall onto the couch with the broom and dustpan in hand. And I fall asleep. And I slept until about 3-8. Like my sisters were gone. They, helped my mom my sister was gone. My sister and my niece were gone. And, the rest of the family, they helped my mom get to bed. And I wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm looking and I'm like, what has happened? But I'm so exhausted at this point. Like it feels like a train has run over my body and my mom is sleeping fine. So I go upstairs and again, back to the OCD, I literally just take off my pajamas and I put on another shirt and I throw everything on the floor. Like everything is completely out of character at this point. And I wake up the next day and my nose is running and I'm sneezing. So I don't feel terrible, but I have these, upper respiratory symptoms that I never have.
Yeah.
And my mom, I don't think I mentioned this, but my mom had just gotten over bronchitis about 2 weeks prior. And so that was even still working its way out of her system. And what happened was throughout the night, I heard her, but it was almost like I couldn't remember it until I woke up. Her cough resurfaced right away. So she started coughing and then she was tired, she was exhausted and she was, not resting. And I'm like, I don't know if it's too late at this point, but I'm like mask, we're doing all of these things. And I'm just like, I don't know, if there's a chance that we can prevent it from getting any worse. But by this time, the entire state of Georgia is a mess, right? And so we can't get tested. We can't, the hospitals are turning us away and saying we're not testing unless you're not able to breathe. We cannot treat you. I mean, they're plastering signs all over the place. This is not a testing center. All of these different things, because we were telling my sister's family, like, because they were seemingly worse off. Like, hey, go get tested and get treated, get whatever you need right now, because now we're watching the news. And now the news is talking about what's happening across the globe all over again. It was really just like it started over. And we were just in a state of fright, confusion. Like when I talk about it now, it's almost like some of the things I don't even remember until I'm discussing it in this type of, in this way, because I'm like, oh yeah, this happened. But we are on top of my sister, on top of like, hey, you guys go get tested. And they just kept telling us, nobody will test us. We can't get in line. Like the lines are, they're telling us they're cutting off testing at midnight and that we got to come back at 7. So it was really, I don't know what it looked like across the globe, but it was really bad in Georgia. Yeah. It was terrible. The way in which they just weren't prepared, the same way in which we weren't prepared. Our medical professionals were not at all prepared for what this surge did. Mm-hmm. And that is, ultimately how it infiltrated our family. And I was hit with it the worst immediately, because after Christmas Day, we ended up not getting tested till a couple of days later. But my mom, she was so strong that it just seemed, other than the little cough, it just seemed like it was doing nothing to her. And I felt relieved. I'm like, okay, well, even though I feel sick as a dog, like at least mom is okay. Like at least, this, and I wasn't shocked by that, because despite her health conditions, her immune system was still so strong. And so I was like, okay, I can get through this. I feel like crap, but I can get through this. And I ended up having to go to ER, and that's when I saw what this was doing. I saw the state that we were in. And my mom was concerned about me. I'm like, you're the one with the pre-existing health conditions, but she's concerned. Like, she cared for me down to the last moment. And it was almost as if, as soon as I know my daughter is okay, then whatever's happening with me can take form. And that's really just how it happened. And the level of just, I think, extra measure of care and concern that she had. You grieve. People always think that it's about, the loss, and it's the love. That's what we grieve. We grieve the love that we had. Many of us, I know many people grieve lost opportunities, but even in a lost opportunity, it's still love. Even in displaced relationships, it's still love. Whether you had it or whether there was a longing for it, it is still love. And I'm fortunate that I actually had that. And I hold on to that, but that's what I miss. I miss my person. That was the person who cared for me when nobody else, I'm not going to say what nobody else did, but that was the person I never had to question. Yeah. That was there no matter what. She probably felt terrible when I was in ER, but I didn't know. It was just, she was on the phone with my whole family that entire night. Like, I just need to, they were all telling me, like, she was just crying and she just needed to make sure you were okay. And it was just, I got a morphine shot. For me, it was, she's healthy. She's having a little bit of a response to it, but she'll be fine. And true enough, that was probably the worst 24 hours I had. But I felt grateful. I was like, okay, I'm fine. I think they gave me the urgent care gave me a cortisone shot. And so, I'm sorry, not a cortisone, a steroid shot. And I had never had that before because they said that my nasal passage was severely inflamed. And after that, I think that kicked in like 20 to 30 minutes. So this is the next day. because ER didn't test me. They wouldn't test me. They said because my O2 levels were above 98. They only gave me something for my fever. They confirmed that I had pneumonia. But they gave me something for my fever, and they gave me morphine, and they sent me on my way. So that was another thing that, we're talking about. Yeah, my nephew was the root of what happened with our family, but then there was another layer to this with how this was handled medically. You had to be in a critical state of respiratory, functionality for them to service you. So they're basically sending all of these 99.9% sure COVID positive people back into the world, because it took me a whole 2 days after my visit to ER to get tested. And then my mom another day after that.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a lot. And it's still a lot to process. It has gotten, better to manage, but the trauma of, it's not to undermine any other experience, because your loss is the greatest loss, right? Like, no matter what happened, I lost my mom to COVID, somebody else lost their mom to cancer, some to, natural causes or other things like that. But your loss is the greatest loss, and only you know what the circumstances are. But I can without question say, losing a loved one to COVID and losing a very close personal relationship in this way, it is a devastation I can't describe, because we also have to look at it daily in so many ways. But yeah, I'm going to take a deep breath.
Yeah. Yeah, you do that, and I will ask. So you were mentioning how they weren't testing for COVID unless you were at a lower oxygen level or there was something dire going on. So how did it come about that they found out your mom had COVID and that she went into the hospital or was like taken into the hospital?
Yeah, so we okay, Christmas Eve, December 24th, 25th. So we got tested between the 26th and the 28th. I think those were kind of our testing dates. And I have to give you that range because that's how hard it was for us to get on a schedule. Like, I stalked urgent care for 4 hours to get my mom an appointment.
Wow.
And right? And her testing was at 7:00 at night in Peachtree City, which is about 30 minutes from my home. And it didn't matter if you said, hey, I have a person who has like extreme health, pre-existing health conditions, or, has very sensitive health situation. Can I get them on? That didn't matter. The urgency didn't matter. The way that they rolled out like the antiviral treatments, by the time we got my mom tested, so to answer this question and then to talk a little bit more about what they didn't do, we get to the urgent care. So at this point, I've tested. I am positive, and so I am literally handling my mom. No one can step in because we all have COVID. It's like, it really, like, what do we do now? And so I'm like masked. I got like 5 pair of gloves, 3 masks, all these things. Because at this point, I'm sure my mom has it. So it was more so about how can we treat it? Like, how can we help her not get to a point of death? Like, how do we save her life right now? Because again, she was so strong. Like, even the way that she was responding to it was not as aggressive as mine seemed to be. Like, she didn't have congestion. She didn't sneeze. Her nose didn't run. She did have this nagging cough that would come. And again, I believe that was more so exacerbated by the fact that she still had some remnants of bronchitis in her system. So she had the perfect setup for, hey, let's attack. That was just what was going on in her body. She had a very recent diagnosis of congestive heart failure. that was well managed. And it's like, how do you say congestive heart failure is well managed? Well, she wasn't on, any extreme treatment. It was just more of a monitoring. Like, let's do CPAP a couple of nights a week. Let's keep your appointments with your cardiologist. Like, let's just make sure we continue to do the right monitoring so that we don't teeter over into that critical zone.
Yeah.
So she takes her test and he tells her, well, yeah, you have COVID pneumonia. And she's like, oh God. And I'm like, Mom, you're going to be fine. Like, because at this point I'm still like, you're still doing better than me. And he says, so this is when I think my spirit I still didn't think death, but I thought, oh God, she's probably going to have to deal with the worst symptoms if they can't help her with this. So he says, unfortunately, the state is out of, they've dispersed all of the antiviral treatments. And so I'm like, I guess in that area, that zone, that district, and I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, was there a process? Because I'm like, everybody that has come in here has not been, in a critical condition. Like, are you all just giving it to people on a first come, first served basis? Or did you really consider the patients that you were giving this treatment to? Were you handing it out like candy? Like, what was happening here? He was like, yeah, they were giving it out, for anybody that came in that tested positive. And I'm like, so you have a lot of critically ill patients or patients who probably could become critically ill that can't get treatment because you all just gave it out all willy-nilly. And he's like, yeah, she'd be he's like, she'd be a perfect candidate for this. He was like, but yeah, her oxygen level, it was kind of this casualness. And I'm like, my 75-year-old mom who has, she beat multiple myeloma, but she had it, like multiple myeloma, congestive heart failure, diabetes, all these things that, she has very successfully navigated and done well with. But she nevertheless is still prone to those things being exacerbated. And you're like, yeah, but your oxygen is 98. Right? You're good. You're good. I'm like, okay. And he said, if it drops below 95, this is what he said. He wanted to check up on her again. And I think it was 1 or 2 days. And he said, but if she goes below 95, do not call me. Do not try to get to a follow-up appointment here. Get her to the hospital. That's what he said to me. So I'm like, okay. But again, she seemed fine. It was scary, but she seemed fine. And then we go home. I tested negative, I think, the day after New Year's. I believe. No. I'm sorry. I didn't go back until the 4th. So I went and tested after she went into the hospital. So on New Year's Day, she's tired, she was getting rest and she was, still in, kind of laughing and in good spirits. And, I think I talked to you about this. I'm a woman of faith, but I was really angry at God. And I was like, you know what? This is not right. Like, I am furious. I am upset. Like, how could this happen to my family? There's a thing called accountability, but then I'm like, this just doesn't seem fair. This just doesn't seem right. Like, and I know I'm not the only person, and I know we're not the only family that, quote unquote, did all the right things. Being conscious of health is not like some moral badge. Like, it's not like, oh, we're better than these people because they actually got it early on. That's not what this is. But it's like, come on, dude. Like, we didn't do anything wrong. How could you? So I'm crying. I'm trying not to let her see me cry. I'm furious because I don't see her at this juncture. I'm not seeing her decline or anything like that, but I'm noticing that she is becoming weaker. And so I was just like, okay. So I was like, all right, Mom. Well, she was in a recliner and I'm like, we got to get you, changed and get you into bed. We had these medicine. They gave us like these, I don't know what they call them, but I call them coughing pearls. They're like these little gel tablets for coughing. They told, and that typically works for, I think, standard bronchial situations and upper respiratory situations. But word to the wise, nothing normal works for COVID. Like, nothing blood thinners to stop clotting, that doesn't work. Cold medications, that doesn't even ease the symptoms. Like nothing works. And so, we had like this little concoction. It's so funny. I look at the picture of it sometimes, but we have this little concoction. And even so on January 1st is when I was like, okay, she was at 94. I think it was like 94. And to me, I noticed shortness of breath. And I'm like, okay, Mom, I'm going to call the paramedics. And she hates the hospital. I hate the hospital, probably because we spent so much time there, just making sure she stayed well in general. And so it's like, okay, Mom, I got to call. She's not on oxygen. That wasn't her normal life. So we don't have oxygen at our disposal. We've got to get some help. It's really weird now to walk into Walgreens and see like this portable kind of oxygen that you could just buy as a supplement until you get to the, all of these things now. But I'm like, we got to get to the hospital. So the paramedics come, and what they did was they got her in an upright position because they came into the home and they're like, oh my God, you have a lovely home. Like, you sure she wants, I don't think she should go to the hospital unless she has to. And I'm like, well, we don't have oxygen. I said, so if you all can get her stabilized and assure me that her heart rate and her O2 levels are fine, we'd rather not go to the hospital. I said, but what's not going to happen is I'm not going to sit here and watch my mom die just because she doesn't want to go or because I don't want her to go. I was like, I want to get her the help that she needs. And so I said that, but it was still, I'm not thinking like she would die. I'm like, I didn't say that. I was like, I don't want her situation to get more critical and more severe just because we don't want to go to the hospital. And so they got her oxygen levels up to like 97, and they were like, okay, they observed her for about 35, 40 minutes. And they were like, okay, we think she's fine. You all definitely call us if you get any other alerts. But we think she's going to be okay. We definitely recommend staying home. And they said, in their words, the hospitals are war zones right now.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even understand. And so the next day, the same thing happened. So she got back into the bed. So I'm trying to like roll her over. I can't remember the term for it right now, but when they have the patient on their bellies to kind of offset the oxygen flow. So I'm doing that. And I noticed anytime that I would kind of tilt her over, the coughing would stop. But she was for the most part asleep, but it was like she wouldn't eat anything. And one of her sisters, my aunt Sandra, passed. I remember that happening with her. I remember that just this aggressive halt and not taking any food. It's just like, I don't want anything. I mean, she died a few days later after that, but that was kind of like the first, part of her transitioning. They talk about transitioning happening days before, but she was resisting food and only wanting something to drink. And well, my mom, that's what my aunt was doing, but my mom, like, she was resisting food nobody in my family resists food. So she was resisting food on levels that were concerning to me.
Yeah.
It was not just, I'm not hungry. It was a complete and total disgust. Like, no food. Like, I was trying to force her to eat like this toast or like this, but she was like, no, she's just resisting it. And, I had, the oximeter, I had the finger reading, and I watched her like a hawk. Like, we tried to play a little Connect Four, like we tried to do these things, but she and I both were tired. It was like, okay, we're exhausted. But I called ER again. I'm sorry, I called the emergency medical services again. They came out, and her oxygen levels, they did get her upright again, but her oxygen levels were declining. And they said, okay, we tried. I mean, they were doing everything. The paramedics knew how dire situations were in the hospital, so much so that they were doing everything that they could to try to keep her home. They were like, you all don't have any oxygen here? I'm like, well, dude, if we did, I wouldn't have called you. But no, we don't. Like, can you get us some? Because we'd rather not go. And the guy, he tried to call his friend who was a nurse. He was like, she's got these like epidural, like because my mom had what do you call it? The machine that they use for asthma. But she had just gotten one of those. But they were just giving her this just to kind of help through the process. Like, no, she's not asthmatic or any of those things, but she's having trouble breathing. We're gonna, make nebulizer. I think that's what it's called.
Oh, yeah.
But she had all of that. And the guy was like, can we put something inside of her? He was asking his friend who was a nurse, like, is there any way to supplement oxygen in this? Like, can we do that? He was like, no, if her levels are declining, she's going to need to get to the hospital. So at this point, it's going below 90. So that was the grave concern, is that we're getting out of the 90s. Like, we're getting out of what could be considered a safe zone into a very critical space, especially for someone with her health conditions. And this is when my disruption hit, because not only does she have to go to the hospital, but she has to go to the hospital that I hate, by virtue of proximity, because they were saying like the risk of getting her hospital of choice, a hospital of care, and where she, received most of her specialized care, was a hospital just about 27 to 29 minutes south of where we live, Piedmont Fayette, but the closest hospital to us, I hesitate to even call it a hospital, but this place that they've yet to close down, called Southern Regional Medical Center. And they have to get her there. Like, she's had some excellent care with certain specialists there, but these are visiting doctors. It's never been to stay at that hospital. And they have to get her there because that is the closest, and they did not have the oxygen on the truck to support the commute of 29 minutes, which could have been more, in traffic and trying to get through other cars. And it's like, we can't risk losing her just because, that's where you want to go. We have to get her to the closest one. And so my mom said she was okay with going to that hospital. And I battled with this. I'm like, do I just get her out of that truck and like put her in my car and take her myself, and then risk not having oxygen at all for those 29 minutes? Or do I trust that what needs to happen will happen and we get her to the hospital? So she said she was fine with that. And so she was admitted to ER. And she immediately went into a hypoxic state. So the delusions, like something's under my bed or these people are crazy. Like, she went on this whole kind of rampage. And I stayed closely connected to her, but I closely connected by phone because they immediately locked the hospitals down. But I called those people all night long, and I was like, my mom needs to be in a room. Get her out of ER, because she's not the type of patient that you can just leave in a room with an oxygen mask on. I was like, she's ripping it off. I'm reading all of this stuff on the internet, right? Because they're not telling me anything. I was like, I'm learning, because I was like, hallucinations and COVID. That's when I learned that it was a hypoxic state of mind. I was like, I had to start using their terminology for them to take me seriously. I was like, she's hypoxic. She's causing trouble. Like, a funny story is, like, she had me call 911 because she told me that the hospital was under siege. Like, they were that was my read of it. I was like, Mom, are you saying that the hospital is under lockdown or hostage? She was like, yes, I'm being held hostage. So I was like, the hospital or you? She was like, Keesha, just call 911 now. So I called the hospital. I called 911, and I was like, listen, I just have to take this seriously because I don't know what's happening. And they do go up there. And I think that was also a part of the reason they were like, okay, we've got to get this woman to a room because neither her nor her daughter are going to let us rest. So let's get her in a room. And so I think her admission date is kind of January 3rd-ish, because she finally got to a room early morning of the 3rd. And I think that's confirmed as her official admission date. And so after that, like, I defied all odds. Like, it was kind of, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie John Q, but like, it was a real kind of John Q situation that I did. Like, I go to the hospital and I'm like, if I don't get to see my mom, I'm calling every news outlet. I'm calling everybody. I'm calling the authorities. I'm telling them that you won't let me see her, that you are holding her hostage. I need to see my mom. So I was able to be in the room with her, help her get cleaned up. And I witnessed firsthand just what this was doing. At this juncture, she is, and I'm negative at this point. So I've tested negative at this point. I was able to test the day that they actually took her from the home to the hospital. But I saw the agony. So all of the typical upper respiratory things, like, I've had those. Like, and I think witnessing someone fight to breathe, because this is not, she wasn't on a ventilator or anything. This is her rotating between high flow oxygen and BiPAP. Mm-hmm. And so that rotation, I don't know what it feels like, but my understanding for those people who have been able to come out of it is that it does give you the feeling of, if I got to go through this, just take me. She just kept saying, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. So, and that was later during her stay. But before she got to ICU, they put her in ICU the night that I was in the room with her. And the doctor came in and he took her, she had the oxygen mask on at this point. So he takes the high flow oxygen off and he says, he was a little Indian doctor. He says, breathe for me, Miss Rita, breathe. And she's like, oh, get me out of here. But it was exhausting to even say that. And that was his concern. His concern was, you know what? I am seeing shortness of breath in simple situations. He was like, I need her on ICU monitoring. And so I even helped I helped the team. I cleaned I'm like, this is my mom. Like, if I'm here, anytime she's ever been in the hospital, I'm like, we actually, unless you all have some kind of clause where we can't help, we actually prefer to do it all ourselves. So, they were always so grateful. They were like, oh, you just love your mom? Yeah, I do. I adore her. Like, there's nothing, not perfect, like, she can be a nutcase, but it's my nutcase, that I love. And so got her to ICU. And I just remember, again, understanding, because she kept doing this little funny but cute thing with her hand. And she kept pointing under the bed. And I'm like, Mom, what? And she's like, just tell him, just get him from under there. Like, just move me out of the way. And I'm like, there's nothing under the bed. And she's like, rolling her eyes at me. And she's like, you're going to see. And I'm like, Mom, there's nothing under the bed. But there are all these, like, kind of really interesting things that I think about after the fact. Like, I remember telling her, like, all of my friends love my mom. They're like, all of my friends are praying for you. And she was like, it took me. And I'm like, okay, like, what do you mean? And I'm like, Mom, what are you talking about? And she was like, and she shrugs her shoulders in like this really arrogant way. And she says it again, like, 'cause I'm like, she doesn't even know what she's talking about. She was like, you're going to see, it took me. And I'm like, oh my God. So you hear something like that and you're like, is she forecasting her death? Like, what is she saying? And I'm like, Mom, shut up. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And she's, she was always just like down to the last minute, just so comical and just like lighthearted and very strong in her faith, very much, firm in her way, but still a resilient spirit. And I have that written on my whiteboard in my office, where I'm just like, it did take you. It took you, for a lot of us to just really lean into life consciously. Like, we are so blessed to have that model and that point of reference. Someone who probably, I said it in I think I'd said it in a podcast of my own, or like wrote it somewhere, but I'm like, when she had every reason to throw in the towel, she wrapped it around her hands and said, let's fight, let's go. Like, that's how she did life, and that's how she raised us. And that's how everybody who has experienced her in any way, that's what they know, And so the days after, like, I'm talking to her, I'm talking on the phone, and she's, we're on Duo and FaceTime and all these things, and she'll say, like, tell her to call me back later. She kept telling the nurse, and I was like, she doesn't want to talk to me. And they're like, she's just tired, she's just resting. So every nurse was just, amazing in terms of answering questions and just trying to give us some insights as to what was going on. The doctor that I trusted her with, he actually ended up having to leave and go out of the country himself because his brother passed. And so, yeah, I was not made aware. I tried to do everything to get my mom out of that hospital, and I was not made aware that her care had changed, that, the doctors that were caring for her had changed because they never got on the phone. I never got a chance to talk to them. And at that point, this hospital is really on lockdown. So what I do is the day before she passed, there is this nurse that I've still not resolved with how I want to handle this person. And by handle, I just mean, what do I want to let them know? How do I want to let them know it? How do I express just the added grief and discontent that I have with how they behaved and how they showed up? Her name is Stephanie, and I talked to her on the 12th. I think I gave the hospital a day. I gave my mom a day off. I called the hospital and I said, well, if she's resting and if she's okay and if she's calm and she's not in a hypoxic state, just let her know that her daughters love her. We're going to let her rest today, but we will call back tomorrow. And I call on the 12th, and they get this nurse on the phone, Nurse Stephanie. And I mean, Jennifer, she is short. She is abrupt. I mean, she is just, I'm like, hey, how's my mom doing? She's all right. And I'm like, well, she's not all right. She has COVID pneumonia and she's in ICU. So when I say how she's doing, I mean that I need a specific detailed account of what's her progress, how does she feel? And this nurse just decides to read my mom's entire chart almost. And I think the only thing that stood out for me was she mentioned this thing called, I might have it wrong right now, but I think it's called D-dimers. Essentially, it's the exacerbated potential of clotting. And that number was considerably high. She gave me the number that she had when she entered and where she was. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. If that number, because I was looking it up while she was on telling me all of this stuff. And I was like, well, if that is indicative of clotting, that means her chances of developing blood clots is significant right now. Yeah. What are we doing about that? And why has no one communicated that to me? And she says, well, yeah, I think, and I said, what are they giving her? So my mom was already taking Eliquis, just in general. And then I look up treating blood clots for COVID with normal blood thinners. And it's basically a moot point. Like, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So I was like, y'all are not really treating the blood clots for this then, because you don't know how to treat it. And so then she makes mention of her husband having it. She's like, oh, well, my husband had it. So yeah, this kind of hypoxic and this fatigue. And she's telling me all of these things. I'm like, well, your husband's not the only one that had COVID, and he's not the only point of reference. Like, COVID is not a monolith. Like, what are you saying to me? Like, are you offering me comfort? Are you saying that they have some very similar circumstances? Like, what is your point right now in mentioning your husband? Because right now my mom is in ICU under your care, which I don't have full confidence in. And I mean, she just wasn't, I'm not saying that this is a negligent, I don't know what she is, but I know she didn't offer any reassurance that my mom was okay. At this point, I order a hazmat suit. I order goggles. I order new mask. I order all of this stuff that was to be ready within an hour from Home Depot on the 13th. So now we're in the 13th. This is the day that my mom passes. And that morning, I almost didn't sleep well thinking about this nurse. And I'm like, I gotta get up there to see my mom. So I'm calling everybody in the hospital. And I'm like, I need you all to let me in. I need to see my mom. Because her being in ICU, one of the things that I did was just took consideration for the fact that my mom is not the only patient there. And although I've tested negative, I'm not just going to overthrow ICU for my mom. My mom is not the only person there. And there's a risk, there's a risk associated with all of this. And I basically asked the hospital administrator, the discharge administrator, all of these people for help. I was like, I have everything that I need. I just need to see my mom. And I don't know why it was pulling at me so greatly in that way, but I was like, I need to see her. So finally, the discharge administrator calls me and she's talking to me about a discharge plan. And she's saying, your mom's going to be, we think we're going to get her in pulmonary care. And I said, so she's making progress? And she said, we're not out of the woods, but, things are moving in the right direction. And I said, okay, well, that's reassuring. I still want to see her. And she's like, okay, well, we'll go talk to the, I'll go talk to the doctor, and make sure this happens. So then my mom calls me, and I could be running things together. I can't remember if this was the 12th or the 13th. She passed on the 13th, but I believe on that same day, she called me and she's like, this might have been the 12th. So the 12th, she called me and she was saying something about, I think, being uncomfortable in the bed. And I sent them into her room. So that was the last time that I talked to her, I think in a more conscious state, is when she was telling me that there was some discomfort. She was like, hurry and tell someone to come to the room. And I told the discharge person, I'm like, hey, she needs her phone. I was like, why isn't her phone in her hand? All of these things. Because now, I'm hyper concerned. This nurse, Stephanie, has put me in such an uncomfortable place that I felt like I started to panic. And I think I became almost irrational in my thinking because I couldn't pause and talk to anyone. I really would have loved to have, now in hindsight, it would have been helpful to have a thought partner to just kind of navigate that. But I was so reactionary and just kind of so in my feelings about things that I didn't consider anything except talking to my sisters and just kind of saying, hey, I'm going to see mom. This nurse, Stephanie, is just not rubbing me the right way. And then I'm getting in the car. I'm literally in the car headed to pick up my items from Home Depot. And I see the hospital calling and the doctor. First time I've spoken to this Dr. Patel since my mom has been there on the 3rd. So this is January 13th. And he says, Miss Keesha, I'm sorry your mom has coded. And I've been in the hospital when other people have coded. And I've seen the haste. I've seen, nurses and PAs and doctors, all these people flying from all over every direction. I now understand that it's a real all hands on deck situation.
Yeah.
And I see this happening. And so I'm imagining, my mind just starts going everywhere. And I felt like my heart stopped. I was like, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process it. I couldn't understand it. And he's like, yeah, I was like, bring her back. That's all I kept saying was bring her back. Do whatever you can to bring her back. And so I'm crying and I call my sister and I'm driving. I honestly don't know how I made it to the hospital safely. I really don't. I can't even remember paying attention to any traffic, lights or anything. But by the time we get to the hospital, they tell us they found a pulse. And That was the last conversation I had with my mom. My sister and I went into the room and we called our other sister on FaceTime. And honestly, Jennifer, like, I had screen time with my mom, several times during that week. And each time she just looked so exhausted. And I was expecting more distress. I was expecting just more of a devastated look when I saw her. And the nurse came out before we went back. The nurse came out to me because I kept saying I don't want to see her like that, because in my mind I'm like, I'm going to see her as she normally is very soon. So I don't want to see her in the condition that you all have described, trying to bring her back to life. And so the nurse comes out and she takes like her garments off. And she said, Keesha, I am talking to you as a sister, as an elder, and as a friend. She said, anything that you want to say to your mom, now is the time. And I couldn't process that. I'm like, what are you saying to me? She said, I am saying that anything that you want your mom to hear, even just a little bit of, now is the time. And I go back to the room and, instantly I just look at her face and it was like so much peace. Mm. It was just the weirdest thing. Like, I knew that, at that moment, I'm like, I'm not going to be okay. There is no way I'm going to be okay. But I was looking at me and my sister and I'm like, do you see how peaceful she looks? And we were both just stunned, because that's not what we saw, was not what we associate with all of the rigor and activity that goes along with trying to bring someone back from a code. And when I understood, I was like, okay, it took them over 25 minutes to get a pulse, which means that they exacerbated everything. I mean, they really exercised every option to get her. That's a long time to spend getting someone back, and exhausted as it exacerbated. They exhausted all of their options. And I just remember I had already been reading up on stuff like that. My mom, she was a journaler. She wrote all the time. And so I remember this journal entry she had about her baby sister, my Aunt Jackie, who passed. And my Aunt Jackie, they didn't find a pulse for her or anything, but I just remember my mom saying they knew that she was gone and they were just jumping all over her body. So my mom actually saw that process. I didn't see that. I don't think I was built for that. I'm glad I didn't, if that's how it went down. But we prayed with her. We talked to her. They talk about what could possibly happen in that state of mind, like some responses, but she was intubated at this point, and her eyes opened. We just felt, I felt movement in her hand, and it was like after we prayed, I don't know if that was the permission she needed, just to know, like, at least their faith is still intact. Like, I don't know. I just know that my mom was a fighter, and I know that she had to make this transition on her own terms. And when I say that, I mean she fought until she couldn't anymore.
Yeah.
And that was the last time that I was able to look at her in any sort of state of life, and to hold her hand and to pray with her. And I touched her heart. I touched her legs, her feet. And my mom always said, like, when I die, don't you cry over me. And you don't think about that, when you have those kind of little bypassing conversations or chats, you don't think it'll ever come to that. Even though we all have to go, it's just something about it that makes you think, oh, they're gonna live forever, And it was the most extreme, abrupt, disruptive chin check I've ever had in my life.
Yeah. Chin check. I don't think I've ever heard that.
Yes. It knocks you out.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. So were you there? I guess my question is, she was alive when you were there. Did you get to stay until the end? Or did, like, the hospital make you leave and then you went home and you found out later?
Yeah, it was the latter.
Okay.
I actually think, I think it was happening while we were in the room. It wasn't extreme, there was no jolting of the body or anything like that. But I kept looking and I kept seeing the heart rate, her heart rate, and I kept seeing her blood pressure go down and her heart rate. And I was like, well, what's happening? I was like, because her numbers are going down. And, Stephanie, I did get to meet Stephanie in person, talk about triggers. And, she's, hitting the machine. The doctor comes in and tells them to give her some type of drip. This is a doctor doing his rounds. He's just coming in with instructions. He's not even knowing that she's coded. He was like, oh, she coded. And he's telling them which drip to give her. And the nurse is telling him that, Stephanie, I don't even want to call her a nurse just as much as I don't want to call them a hospital. But she's telling them that, her daughters are over there. And he doesn't come in to talk to us. He doesn't address us or anything. It was just, I think he waved or something, but it was almost if they all knew something we didn't know. That, yeah, we might be able to have her back for a few minutes, but this is pretty much it. And I don't know that I would have been able to handle, like, sort of the last breath type of thing. I know a lot of people say I was there with her till the last breath, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if that's something I need, especially under the circumstances. It's just like, I just don't know what I would feel about that. But I had just made it into my garage, like, when I got the call. It was just bizarre, the timing. The first call came in my garage. The last call came in the garage, and I'm sitting there, and he says, she coded a total of 3 times. So that was her fight. Like, it was a lot. And I just remember him saying, we couldn't bring her back this last time. And I know I threw the phone. I know that. And I think I just hit the wheel and I just screamed. Because now I'm at this house that I've only known with my mom. Like, it's my house, but we've lived, this is her home too. Like, I'm going into this house where my mom will never come back again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is my reality. And it was so hard. Like, I remember walking, my sister and my brother-in-law called, and they're like, we're going to get you a hotel. Can you get to the hotel? Do you need someone to come get you? His family lives in East, in Decatur, Covington. And he's like, do you need my sisters to come get you? And I'm like, no. And I just remember walking back and forth downstairs, like, just walking back and forth. I have no idea what I was doing. It was a real, out of body experience. Like, I'm just walking back and forth, and I take this bag. I have like this little duffel bag, and I don't know what I put in the duffel bag, but I do know that I had my computer. And it's just amazing, like, how you turn on and off in this type of process. Like,
Yeah.
I remember getting to, I remember being sort of in a zombie-like state as I was driving to the hotel, which is not far from my house. And I remember going into the hotel, and my mom just died. But I'm looking at these people, and they're like, "Hey, how you?" And I'm like, "Fine." It seemed like I'm sure it was a very short check-in, but it seemed like the longest check-in of my life. Like, all I had to do was get my key. That's pretty much all I did. But I felt like I could not move away from this desk. Like, I'm like, I can't get away from here. Like, and I go up to the room, and Jennifer, it's cold. This is January 13th. It's cold. It's cold in temperature. It's cold inside of me. The world feels dark and cold. It is late at night at this point. But there was nothing about, not that anything should feel good, but nothing felt comforting. Nothing felt reassuring. Everything felt stale, and I felt like things were closing in. It was just awful. And I get up to the room, and I drop everything. And I remember, I don't know if you've ever seen these movies, like the horror films where the room is dark and the TV is kind of on static, and you see like this weird blue light. That was my atmosphere. There was no light. I didn't turn any lights on. But I sat on the bed, and the TV was on. Martin is one of my favorite shows, and I couldn't even enjoy Martin. That's when I knew it was over. I was like, okay, if Martin doesn't do it, I am done. Like, this is over for me. And so I just remember that being on the television. And I take out my phone, and it was so weird. I was actually looking at the post not too long ago because I realized that I have over 600 text messages in my phone that I've not responded to since that time.
Wow.
And I don't know that I don't even know where they are. They're so far, this is January. So tomorrow is 9 months for me. 9 months of doing life without my favorite person ever. And I would literally have to go back that far. So I don't know that I'll ever be able to do it. I don't know if it'll happen. I don't know if one day I'm just sitting and I want to read through it. I don't know. But I went back to the post that I had written that night. And I was talking to my ex, and it was because unfortunately he lost his mom several years ago. So it was, just he was kind of priming me for what was about to happen. He's like, I know every situation is different. Because at this point, I think he was made aware of between a mutual friend, of what had transpired because I posted it. And he's like, people are about to start bombarding you to try to fix it. And he said they mean well. They are very well meaning. They love you, that they care for you, but there's nothing they can do for you in this moment. And he said, and I don't say that as a pessimist. I just say it because I know the loss that you feel. And they are going to work overtime because not only are they caring about what you're going through, they're also hurting that someone such a great person is having to navigate this pain. He was like, so you're going to have people trying to own that pain for you and lift as much of it as they can, although there's nothing they can do. And he's not a faith-based person. So I'm just like, okay, that is all good and everything that you're saying matters, but can you say something that just feels warm right now? Like, but I mean, he has a great sense of humor. So we ended up laughing a little bit, and I couldn't believe I was laughing. I don't know if you're familiar with the cartoon Arthur, but that's what I looked like. Like, my eyes were so swollen. Like, it was just like these huge layers of skin, like, hanging over my eyes because I didn't sleep. I just cried all night long.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I posted was a measure of admission and defense, because I'm a project manager by trade. And so just planning and forecasting and solutionizing and analyzing and figuring out the what ifs is a part of my construct professionally. And one of the reasons that I do well in my profession is because those are natural aptitudes that I have. It's just, okay, this is what I do. Girl, you can't plan this. you can't analyze this. You can't orchestrate it. You can't organize grief.
Yeah.
You can embrace it. You can let it unfold. You can be conscious and aware of it. But there is no organization of this pain. And that's what I was attempting to do, in hindsight. I'm like, it was a very heartfelt, authentic post. But I was doing two things with that. I have to say it now to admit that it has happened. And of course, we're all communicating on social media. Like, I'm not going to send out a mass text like, hey, my mom died, but I'm like, this is the way that we communicate. This makes the announcement, but also says, leave me alone in the politest way possible. But it was also just my announcement because all of the people who know me, one of the first things that they often ask is, how's mom? How's mom doing? I have one friend, Kirsten, that's like, your mom is my sweetie. Tell Rita I said, hey, my best. They all just love her. Those who love her know her, love her. And I was trying to prevent any trigger that I could in that moment. I'm like, I know I can't prevent it all. But because at this point, too, everybody knew that our family had been infiltrated with COVID. So it was this prayer line, this checking on y'all. I checked in with my own praise report, like, hey, COVID free, waiting on the, clean bill of health for my mom and my dad and my sisters and everybody else, because my other sister did not have it at this time. But yeah, that was that I every time I think about where I am now, if ever I am feeling, I had a little bit of a moment this morning when I woke up. One of my grief counselors calls it release instead of breakdowns. I'm like, oh, I had a breakdown. He's like, no, it's a release. I was like, okay, I had a release. So I had a light release this morning because when I do wake up in the early hours of the morning, I'm accustomed to looking, I have a Juliet balcony, and I'm accustomed to looking over that balcony saying, Mom, you're up, or, how are you sleeping? And she would wake up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and like either listen to music, like play her game or read her Bible, like whatever, she felt like doing to ease her mind. That's what she would do. So I now wake up to this dumb silence, so that's the other thing. I have to keep TVs on a lot, like, just noise. I that's just one of my coping mechanisms. But if ever I am doubtful about my ability to make it, and I don't call it a new normal, I just call it life now, life after, life during, life as it is. Like, it is just another stage. There's nothing normal about this type of disruption. I've just made it a personal practice to associate normality with something I desire and something that I want. And I don't desire this kind of heartbreak and devastation. And so the what now is what I'm living in. And if ever I'm discouraged or just fatigued by the art of trying, right? Like, it's literal labor and work to try and live and lean into the joy and happiness after basically having your heart ripped out.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah.
And whenever I doubt my ability or just don't feel like it, I remember, it's not something I want to hold on to, but I remember that unfortunate night in that hotel room where I had to tell everyone my mom died. And that moment that I did not think I was going to make it. Like, I posted that I was never going to commit suicide. That was never, in the forecast, but I also did not have a will to live. It was like, whatever happens, I don't care. Like, if I lose my house, if I lose everything and I'm just on the street somewhere, let it be. And people think that I'm exaggerating because that's not the Keesha that they know. I'm like, well, the Keesha that you knew is no longer. I am different. I'm fundamentally the same, but I have changed. And without, much of it has been forced without my permission. And I've had to lean into that. Like, things that I used to tolerate, I can't tolerate. I'm learning what I can and cannot tolerate. Um, yeah, that's how it hit.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that because I get in that headspace, and I was actually at this, I guess it was like a live podcast show, which I've never been to before, but I went to that on Monday night, and she was talking about how there are times when it just pops into her head that she just doesn't want to be here anymore.
Yes.
And I can relate to that. Like, do I want to end my life and do I have a plan? No. But there are times when it's so overwhelming that you're just like, all right, I'm ready for this to be over.
That's it.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing that we need to talk to each other about and admit out loud. It's not anything that's wrong with us. It's just life.
It's just life. It's just life. And it'll shock people. It'll shock people who've known you, and I'm sure you're probably in this space too, it sounds like, but when people have just kind of known you to be the optimist, resilient, the joyful, showing up in all of the quote unquote right ways.
Yeah.
To say something like that is extremely disruptive to what people have known, what people are comfortable with. And it's like, wait a minute, like even that disclosure, even saying, well, no, I've never committed suicide, but I have had moments, and I continue to have moments where I'm just like, you know what? If this is it, I'm good with it.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah.
If it all ends now, I'm fine. And it freaks, specifically my older sister, it freaks her out. Like, she just, oh, Keesha, don't say that. And I'm like, no, honey, I'm not saying this in a, self-devastating and I'm going to kill myself kind of way. I'm saying it in a human, and I'm tired.
Yeah. And you pretty much did spend months on this journey of trying to organize your grief, as you said. And you went through a lot of major changes in your life.
Yeah, I did. I initially, so that was one thing when this all happened. Many companies don't have the infrastructure because I think at this point, I think something as disruptive as a pandemic needs to be handled a little bit differently than your typical grief. And typical grief, I don't even want to say that because it seems to undermine other grief, but like, it's a different and unique situation. The same way in which we've had to approach kind of how we do life now, it's the same protocol should have been put into place for this type of disruption. And to have to take standard FMLA with this is something you don't know what's going to happen. Like, I worked in higher education before, so we were already on holiday break, which is pretty much like, it seems like an eternity, but it's about a month and a week or so. But we were already on break, and they, I think this was the week that we were supposed to return. I'm like, oh, this is the 4th, I believe, the 4th of January. And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm just going to take an additional week. Because I'm thinking, oh, my mom will be out of the hospital by the 10th. Like, so just, I'm going to take an additional week. And that was my vacation time. But then, of course, my mom passed while I was thinking that I was just going to be taking a few days. So my my first point of action is not, let me call my job and get my paperwork together. My mama just died, and who cares? I mean, that was another thing that I didn't care about. If you fire me, fire me. You know, whatever you want to do it. I know that a lot of the things that probably stopped them from doing it's just the potential of lawsuit, but you know, it's like, I don't care what you do at this point. And I mean that. I mean that with everything in me. This is not going to be one of those situations where after the fact, like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. Because what I'm at the point that I was, and I'm still here in many ways, is that I've dealt with what could potentially mark the most difficult thing of my life, the most difficult disruption, the most difficult thing I ever will probably have to face and navigate. One of, at least now it's the most, but it definitely will rank at the top forever. And I'm like, if I am navigating that, I could care less about you all in this job. And so they were like hounding me about this paperwork and you know, this FMLA, and if we don't, I mean, they were so brutal. One day I was coming out of the hospital the day that I was coming out of the hospital with my mom's medical records, the HR or benefits coordinator called me, and she's like, you know, telling me about this paperwork that has to be updated. We're trying to protect your job. No, FMLA is a federal program. I know exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure your records are intact. Like, this is more about you all than it is for me. But she's like, you know, we need this paperwork filled out. I was like, I just picked up my mom's medical records from the hospital where she died. I cannot have this conversation with you right now. And she said, okay, but you know that and I just hung up because she's still talking paperwork. So I hang up the phone, but that was kind of like the first. It's like I've been in higher education all of my career. This is like 19 plus years. And I realized sort of the like toxic situations that I was navigating. These sort of standard practices of, you know, I work at a firm now where relationship before task is kind of is exactly how we approach our work with our clients, with one another. And it doesn't mean relationship instead of task, but it means creating a healthy pathway to getting your work done by having a healthy boundary balance and respect for one another. And so this wasn't the case here. We're just trying to check the boxes and get the paper in place. And it was such a brutal experience that even my doctor called them and was like, leave her alone. Leave her alone. We'll get you the paperwork. Please leave her alone. And a supervisor who professed to be, this is self-profession, she professed to be my friend. But like fast forward, you know, now we're, you know, I get all the paperwork together that they need to. And what I did over that time was I basically took my grief all over everywhere. Like I went to every hotel you can probably imagine to cry, you know, every state, every mountain, you know, every roller coaster, like wherever I could land. I spent a lot of time in Tennessee, and Tennessee is probably where I would say I found both my grief and my peace. It was both the place where I spiraled and the place where I came up for air. And in that revelation, and by this time my dad is out of the hospital, he's in Virginia with my sister. And so I'm like, okay, I think I can manage this a little bit. Not a lot, but I think I see some leadway. So I will operate between Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee. And, you know, asked to remain in a remote arrangement just until I get, because my mind was, it is now, but it was very different at that time. I'm just like, I don't even know up from down, really. You know, I don't know what's going to happen in this situation. And so I need to posture myself, and I need some help. And in order to help myself, these are the things that I know can work for me right now. These are the things that I know I can do. And so I request what wasn't unreasonable. I just request a little bit of time to remain in a remote situation. We did have an agreement that we could enter into where you could work in different places. So I wasn't relocating to another state. It would just be a couple of days in another state here at a time. So I might be in Tennessee this week. I might be in Virginia, but for the most part, I would be in Georgia. So I asked for these light accommodations, and they were light. I'm not even going to say that that's subjective. Like, they were very light accommodations, especially considering the work that I did was not front facing. Mm-hmm. And my supervisor and then division head, the associate provost, sent me the coldest response. I help create policy. I help manage policy. So I know when I'm reading policy. And so I'm reading this very policy-driven email that has no humanity in it whatsoever, no compassion, no empathy. And then my former supervisor says, in the communication, and of all the things that she said no to, it was like, no, you can't have these days off. No, you can't work out of state. I'm not going to approve this. I'm not going to approve this. All of this. And this is a person who knows my situation probably more intimately than anybody, in the division at this point. So, and she herself has, a person that she cares for. And I'm like, everybody doesn't bounce back the same. Like, I remember when her sister died, she went to the funeral and came to work that following Monday. And I hate this kind of toxic practice where that becomes the standard for how people should adjust. Oh, well, she came back to work right away. Well, so can you. I don't know how she was coping. I don't know what she was doing, but that's not going to work for me. And she sent this cold email. And the one line that I think took me over the edge was, I have supported your taking the 12 full weeks of medical FMLA. I didn't need you to support that. I was entitled to that. But she expressed it as if she did me a favor. And so the thing is that this is something they call it Twitter fingers. So I probably would have, cracked my knuckles and started typing a whole bunch of stuff, But this was really what it was when they show you who they are, believe them situation.
Yeah.
And I literally just responded. I mean, it took a lot to just respond this way, but I just said, receive with thanks. And I think that's an auto response in Gmail anyway, but that's what I said. I was like, receive with thanks. And I instantly called my mentor to my sisters. I was like, I am quitting. This is it. I am resigning tomorrow. And my sister's like, pray about it. So, I'm still at a point where I don't want to hear that either. And I was like, nope, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to anybody that's going to tell me to seek God and to pray and all of this. I want to quit. I want to resign, and I want support with what I'm telling you I want to do. And I did end up praying about it. So, it was sort of a, just a spiritual consult. And I slept really well that night, Jennifer. Like, I slept so good. And I woke up the next day. And at this point, we're one day in the office. But this was a virtual day. And I log on, and my supervisor starts crying. I have no idea why. I'm the one that just lost my mom. But then I recognize, I'm like, I think that there was a reality in the situation, because at this point, we haven't laid eyes on each other since the holidays, like since before the break. And so I think to see my face and to not see my face in despair, because the message that I got spiritually was, to show up with grace, show up with appreciation, show up with gratitude. And I'm like, but I don't feel any of those things. And so I did. And that week, 4 hours into that day, is somehow on March 1st, I got the energy to apply to the current job that I have now. I don't know how my posturing, I don't know how I did it. I tell people all the time, my mind was so all over the place, at least until April. Like, it was really a blur. And I'm like, what? I keep going back to my emails now, like, what was so magical about March 1st that I sort of snapped out of it and was like, let me do something that's probably going to change my life. And I don't know what it was, but it was the easiest application, or the easiest interest in a role that I've ever put out there. And I remember emailing, the address that this is on March 1st. I emailed the address that they asked to send the application to, and I got I didn't get a response from that, but I'm one of those people that when I want something, like I'm going to stalk everybody involved. So then I'm like, oh, okay, here's the CEO. Let me send, and it's a small firm. So I'm like, let me send it to her. She's probably personable. And we have the same name, except for our, before the HA, I have an S and she has a C. And so I'm like, I wonder, I was like, is she German? I'm like, oh no, she's a Black lady. I've never worked in, a company that centers racial equity and justice and just, the advancement of brown people. I'm just like, this could be interesting. And doing all of the things that I love. Like, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, this is too good to be true, but I'm going to put it out there anyway, just in case the universe wants to return something to me good right now, since I've been screwed over royally. So I put it out there. And then I emailed the CEO, and she's out, I got a message that she was out like for the rest of that month. Like, this was March 4th at this point, and it says that she was out until the 22nd, I think it was. So there was like, if this is an emergency, then it gave another person to contact. So I was like, well, I'm going to email everybody. So I emailed that person, and the date, so fast forward, and that was my last, I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this because then they're going to think I'm crazy. So then now I'm back at, my former employer, and I am about 3 or 4 hours into the workday, and I get this email from this, I thought it was spam. I get this email from this search firm, that says, hey, we received your application to this position. We'd love to get a 30-minute consult on the phone on the calendar with you for Monday. So this is Thursday. Whether people will celebrate it or not, but this is the week leading up to the Good Friday and the Easter holiday. So this is the Thursday before that. So I get this email on Thursday. She's like, we'd like to give you on calendar Monday. So I'm like, sure, why not? I'm entertaining it. And I'm like, I have this 30-minute conversation on Monday. And she's like, hey, I'd love for you to talk to our ED of the search firm. Would you be open to that conversation? She's like, I don't know how you feel about back-to-back interviews, but we have something tomorrow. So this is Tuesday. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll have that conversation. This was a Zoom, face-to-face. And so we have about an hour-long conversation. And she's like, listen, I would love to, move you forward to talk to the CEO. And I'm thinking, oh, that's the one that was out of the country. She's like, I'd love to move you forward to talk to the CEO and perhaps another project manager from the firm. She said, I know we kind of have you in all these back-to-back interviews. She said, you'll have a day to reset, because they won't have anything available until Thursday. So this is Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. And I'm like, okay. So I get on the phone, Zoom, and have this beautiful conversation. I had never had an interview like that, where I was able to speak fluently and candidly about what I needed professionally, where I come from professionally, and also to acknowledge that I've had this major life disruption, which is how I started the conversation. It's like, well, what brings you here? Well, my mom died. And, I know that's not what anybody's looking for, but ultimately my mom's death stopped me in my tracks. I feel like I've been very purposeful and intentional in my life, but I don't know that it's been this intense, where it's like the vision is so much clearer, and just the intuition, like what I am and am not going to tolerate. And so her death pushed, kind of propelled me into that space of, you have tolerated some things that have not been to your liking or even to your deserving. You deserve to be in a company that doesn't gaslight you, but really appreciates you, that pours into you. You deserve to work with people that genuinely care about the feelings of others. And this is not about perfection. This is just about, you deserve what your heart desires. And I think you should go for that, Keesha. So I'm like, okay, why not? So I share this. our now I can say our firm, but then it was their firm. They closed out the conversation with a practice of appreciation. So I'm like, oh, okay, what does that mean? And it's literally what it is. Like, we extend appreciations to whoever participated in that conversation for something they did or how they showed up. Of course, for us, it would be how we showed up because I just met these people. And I was like, wow, it's almost like, why am I shocked about good things? Like, this should not be a shocker. This should be normal. Like, I should be experiencing things like this all the time. And beautiful conversation, but we end that. And I got a call about, probably 3 hours after that, with a soft offer. And then and my sister kept saying, because we were going to Virginia for that weekend, that was one of the trips my former employer was saying I couldn't take. And I was like, well, I'm going, so you do what you need to do. So my sister goes, what if you have your job offer before, like, while you're on the road on Good Friday? And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'll be done with interviews, but I can't speak, emphatically to whether or not I'll get this job. And true enough, I had a 3:00 appointment with the firm to accept my offer. And so I had to stop. I timed it well, stopped at a rest stop in South Carolina. And that's when we did our onboarding call and I signed everything. So, really quick reference, just prior to that on April 1st, I had started sort of a cleansing fast with one of the ministers that I follow. And one of the front running purposes of that fast was, it's not like a hocus pocus, like, oh, you fast and this is going to happen. It's just a centering, like just something to align. And I think this can happen whether people are spiritually based or otherwise. Anytime you get into a cleansing space to center your heart and your mind and your soul in expectation, it sort of drives your actions, like what's going to happen now. And it just postured sort of this supernatural, and suddenly it was like, okay, this is what we're going to focus on this month. We're going to walk into the suddenly and the rapid. Things are going to move faster than you anticipated. And that's all I could think about that week was, wow, like this is exactly what I've never been on an accelerated hiring path like that before. And so that has transformed everything. I mean, it was like that was the segue to so many different things. I finally stopped running from my grief. So that happened one day when I realized, okay, it really doesn't matter where I go. This heartbreak is going to feel very strong and it's going to hit when it wants to. And so, shameless plug, like I walk into the house and I fall to my knees and I cry. I cried so loud that I thought the entire neighborhood heard me. I mean, I cried my heart out. And that is why my podcast is called From Crying Out Loud. Like, it's just, it really happened that way. Like, and I'm sitting there and then I told my sister, I was like, I wish I had like cameras in the house, like at every angle. And I'm still thinking about doing this because I think I want to share what this looks like. I wish someone could have witnessed that moment. Mm-hmm. I wish they could have seen it because it was so real and it was so raw. Because right after I did that, then, you know how babies throw tantrums? That's what it was. And when they kind of settle down and they either cry themselves to sleep or they just start laughing or something. That's what happened. I'm still on my knees and I'm crying. I'm just looking around. And then I start, again, the OCD kicks in. Then I start straightening, getting my pillows together on the couch. It was the most bizarre thing ever. But those are the things that I have embraced and allowed myself to feel. I have exactly what I've prayed for, what I've asked for, what I've discerned and desired, in a workspace. Like I wanted to be remote. I wanted the opportunity to just be in different places and spaces that could align with my healing. Because this is now, I've always wanted to kind of have the remote option, but this has moved beyond just wanting to work from home. This is now about the delicate attention to soul care. I get up and I shower and get dressed just like I'm going into an office. So I have not deviated from those routines. But because I'm doing work that I enjoy, it's not easy work by any stretch of the imagination, but because I'm doing work that I enjoy with people that I, actually like, and working with all of these change makers across the world, like, it's just, life has meaning in a new way. And sometimes I find myself, like, man, I wish my mom, could see this. I wish, because she knew my frustrations, even with my former employer, like, I'm like, oh God, they get on my nerves. And, like, oh my God, like, we're meeting just to meet. And they're so stressed about not being in person that they feel like we got to be on Teams all day long. So she heard all of that. And I've always told her, I'm just so thankful that your heart stays anchored in faith and in gratitude, because even when I'm being a mess, she's like, okay, are you done? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not finished yet. So yeah. Life has changed, and you can experience joy and grief at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's where I am.
Yeah. I do have a couple of questions. I wrote down a note about your nephew, and I wanted to ask, have you made some sort of reconciliation with that, like for yourself, emotionally, and your heart?
Yes. Interestingly enough, Jennifer, this is a nephew that I see regularly,
Yeah.
Here's a funny story. He plays football, so he went to a football camp at the University of Alabama. And I drove him down there. I drove him to the football camp. But here's where it gets really interesting. This other beautiful young boy, these are just young boys trying to find their way, And this other young man comes out, to greet my nephew and, help him up to, he was staying with them in his apartment. And he goes, I think my nephew calls the guy by his name. He calls him on the phone to let him know we're outside. That's what happened. He calls him on the phone to let him know we're outside. And when he says the name, I look over and I go, is this the young man that gave us COVID?
Oh.
And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh wow. So I'm wondering, like, when I see this guy, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. What am I going to say? Like, I'm not going to strangle him or anything. I'm like, well, what is this going to be? And I see this well-mannered young man come out, help my nephew get his things. And I'm just like, these are just, it's not an excuse, but I'm like, these are just kids. Like, these are just young boys with no real awareness of what is happening, what is going on. Like, I know that this wasn't a conscious decision, but here is where, so if I can add another prompt myself, I'm okay with him. I haven't really been mad at him because I know that this wasn't intentional. I think it was negligent, but I know it wasn't intentional. Then I have to get into, what do I feel about my sister, the older person, not making a more sound decision about whether or not to keep her family at home. Mm-hmm. All of these what ifs that I am slowly but surely not spending as much time with anymore as I used to, because they're not getting me anywhere. But this is where it gets a little interesting for me, is when I see anything that mirrors that same negligence, I go back to that place of anger and upset. An example is they were recently sick again. They didn't have COVID, but they were sick. And me and my great nieces and nephews went to the beach. And they were all kind of, dancing with the idea of going to the beach with us. Mm. And I was like, y'all, so I actually just have to be candid. I was like, y'all do realize this is what killed my mom, don't you? You do realize that this is the behavior that that brought our mom to a premature death. You recognize that. And I know it's harsh, but it's like I've danced around and I've been soft with it for so long that I'm like, no more, no more. And so they're used to it now. I think what I had to do to help me kind of heal in that respect, or be able to deal with it a little bit more, is once again, going into naming. I had to name that. I had to name that I do blame them. Not tap dance around that fact. Like, I do blame them for not being more conscious of the fact that a variant was very active and on the loose. I do blame my nephew for being in spaces and then coming, because my older sister is diabetic. So even aside from my mom, his mom is of a vulnerable population, and she did almost succumb to COVID the second she had COVID pneumonia a second time, and it was terrible. She had gotten to a point where she was like, if it's time to go, I'm ready. So it's like to see these things, nobody's telling you not to live your life. Just consider others as you're doing so. And, I guess the short of it is, interestingly enough, because I know that has to hurt. I know it. I don't want to imagine what all of that family is feeling like. Specifically her as the decision maker in the household, and him as the person who brought it into the home. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that it is a great burden to bear. And I just recognize I gain nothing from holding that energy. And so each day I just work to hold space for healing, because I eventually want to get to the point where I'm not throwing it in their faces. Because I still do that whenever I'm agitated. Like, whenever they do something, I'm like, oh, yep, there you go, making stupid decisions again. You do understand where this got us the last time. And I know it's kind of dark humor, but it also helps grief. I didn't realize that. I think people are kind of weirded out when I'm telling certain parts of the story and I'm laughing. They're like, oh, is this a manic episode? Like, what's happening here? So that's how that's unfolding.
All right. Well, family's important, and I can tell from listening to you talk that your family is very close and caring. And if you can't be honest and say your true feelings with your family, then, so I'm glad that you're able to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. My last question that I ask everybody who's on the show, so if you've listened, you might know this. It is, what do you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real?
Oh, that could have been a triggering question at one point. And I don't know if it's been explicitly said to me that way, but I can say that I've encountered, the pushback around COVID. And I'll answer this question with an actual situation that happened with me. I was at Bank of America, prepared to go in, and I think they had reached the capacity on the outside. And so one of the things about missing or losing someone to COVID is that there's this kind of hyper awareness with safety for some of us. I'm not saying everybody does it, but I'm probably the most masked person in any situation. Like, I don't mind being in spaces where I'm the only one with a mask. And that's been very common. And so is it the ultimate defense? No, but it minimizes my chances of giving something to someone else or getting it from them. And so I was standing outside getting ready to head into the bank with my mask on, and this young, 6'3" security guard is standing at the door. And I'm not bothering anybody. I'm actually on my phone, me and my mask, just doing what we do, minding our business. And he says, you don't have to wear that, right? And I don't say anything. I was like, Keesha, keep looking down at your phone. Don't entertain this. Look at it. Because I instantly I'm getting not only are you crazy vibes, but like you're probably my nephew's age, so you're operating with this ignorant mindset. Like all these things go through my head, but I just cross my leg and I continue on my phone. And he says, "Did you hear me?"
Oh.
I said, "I heard you, but I'm not listening." And this is our exact conversation. He was like, "Don't you want to breathe?" I said, "Yeah, and I'd like to live too. I just lost my mom to COVID." And he just looked at me. He said, "Oh," I said, "Don't say anything. Don't say anything. You don't have to say anything. You said enough." And I don't know if I'm supposed to be in there, but I just walked in the bank at that point. I was like, you've said enough. And so I'd say to people who are probably still saying that it's not real, I don't wish any of this devastation on anybody, but it costs you nothing to mind your business and just pay attention and let people live and experience their lives, but also just look at the devastatingly alarming numbers. These are not fake numbers. This is not a fake virus.
Mm-hmm.
These are not just numbers. These are mothers. These are sons. These are daughters. These are cousins. These are friends. These are wives and husbands. These people died because people like you said and continue to say that it wasn't real and that it isn't real.
Yeah.
We have the grief to prove that it's real. We have the heartbreak to prove that it's real. We have the sleepless nights, the untapped memories, the things that will never happen to prove that it's real. We have everything. We're holding space for it all because people like you who think that it's not real will not hold space for us. So I'm just in a place of disdain and just disgust with anybody who would still continue to argue that position with all of the lives that we've lost. It doesn't even have to be someone that you love or that you know. The heartbreak is being advertised daily.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that and for doing what I like to do too, which is they were people. They're not numbers. They were people. And your mom has a name, and I sometimes like to ask people to say their person's name out loud. So what was your mom's full name?
My mom's name was Rita Delores Coleman. She was my chosen person, my everything. She was a mother, an educator, a spiritual warrior, a prayer partner, a friend, a confidant. She was the rock of our family, and she lived a beautiful life. She was a person that was prematurely taken by a deadly virus that is very real.
Yeah.
And her life is so much more than that, but we love her.
Yeah. Thank you, Keesha.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time today to tell your family's story and your mom's story and your story of how you're healing.
Thank you.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please, share the show. Until next time.